One, week
Welcome.
4. Week 4. Can't believe we've flown through 4 of these.
That's right.
Can you believe that,
Josh,
Aaron?
I know. It's been like, it just goes by so quickly. And sadly, Josh isn't going to be able to with us
The
today.
bow tie guy
So
is not here.
hopefully, Ali and I can do him proud.
We have big shoes to fill, but you know what? I'll
That's
try
right.
my best. So as you guys know, we live tweet our virtual design school on Twitter. So make sure you take screenshots, put your comments in as we go through the presentation. Make sure you put hashtag BDS 2020 and tag us in those. We love to retweet, get your thoughts on. And so today is, again, this is a meeting now. Before we used to have a webinar. So in the meeting, we have some extra goodies for you guys. So if you go up on the screen, there's view options. You click on it, and then there's an amazing thing called annotate. And we empower you guys with the stamps and the text. Look at that. Hearts everywhere, likes everywhere.
Yeah.
And
I
Aaron and I have an OCD.
right, clear that.
Thank you for following our instructions. You guys are amazing. Okay.
All right, now, good behavior is necessary for us to be able to use this annotate function. So if everybody could please stop stamping, we're going to clear, and then we're going to go on to the next screen where we're going to ask you to use the text function. And what do we want to talk about?
We want to know, so Aaron,
Yes,
journey mapping was a homework last week.
yes. And journey mapping is not easy. We always get a lot of stressed emails and calls saying, this is hard, this is hard. So how did it go? How did it go, guys? Did you plug through it? Any complaints about the process, or did you find some insight? What do you think? Throw it right on the screen. Tough stuff. That seems to capture it all. All right. You know, some of the things, oh, I still don't have a problem to work on. Wait a minute. You are behind. Bit tricky. I did one for my team. Good, good. Shifted how I was originally working through that. I'm really happy to hear that because that's what it's supposed to do. It is supposed to shift you. Makes so much sense once it's complete. Yes, yes, that is such a good point because you just have to get through it. And then once you're done it and you can look back on it, that's where you really kind of get the really deep focus and insights. Make sure you plan ahead. Good. That's a good tip.
Yeah.
Takes focus.
Someone's
Yeah.
researching mapping online software.
Ooh, yeah,
Nice.
nice.
Mural. I think that's two I've heard of. Anything anyone else has heard, put in the chat box if they know any other software they've used for mapping.
All right,
I'm old
takes
school.
focus.
I use my own post-it notes in my room
Mm-hmm.
if I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing it. Um, or
Yeah, I like,
sometimes all I use a table on a Word document. That's how we did it, right, Aaron, back in the day?
yeah, back in the day.
Back in the day.
Back in 1996. All right. Okay, so well, we did get some homework submitted, and there seemed to be pretty much everybody was on the right track with what was going on. What I'm just gonna, there we go. One thing that we came across quite a bit actually was just things that were just a little bit too high level. And so I wanted to show this example. I'm just going to clear again. So in this example, it really kind of, they set themselves up really well. Individuals with mental health and addiction concerns that are sick and tired of being sick and tired and are asking for help to achieve serenity and peace. Seemed very good. And then kind of looked and I thought, achieve serenity and peace, that extends the whole journey into the point where they achieve serenity and peace, and that's a huge chunk. So what if instead of that we sorry, I'm just gonna change my mouth. Instead of that we talk about stopping, so just asking for help is enough. So for example, individuals with mental health and addiction concerns that are sick and tired of being or sick and tired and are seeking help. And what happens then is that the journey becomes from the time when they start to seek help to the time that they find help. And that means that instead of these 5, kind of stages of discovery, getting to peace, it changes the journey into just the first 2. So explore via internet, so they're starting to discover until they find something that resonates and makes contact. And what is interesting is that once you pull that apart and you think about all of the stages in between, you can get to the specific points of frustration and really kind of, when you get down to your insights, understand how you can improve one point of the journey instead of trying to improve the entire journey all at once. And that's what happens quite a bit, is that people try to fix everything underneath the journey with design thinking. But with this process, we really want to focus in at this point of which part of the journey we want to improve, which part of the experience we want to improve specifically.
And I do like their emotions, where
Mm-hmm.
there's a mix. There's already have 2 low points, so those are some opportunities right away of looking
Mm-hmm.
at why are those low points.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So because we're going to talk quite a bit about creativity today, I just want, and because I think that a lot of you maybe haven't started your journey maps yet and are kind of waiting. So I wanted to just say, if you want to still send them in to us to get some feedback, we'll take them as we can as you're doing them. Just try to focus on a small part of the journey and not try to boil the ocean so much. To use a euphemism. So what are we doing today? Today we're moving on to the ideating and deciding points, the creative part of the process, the part where you start to take all of these things that have been milling about in your brain and actually try to come up with some concrete ideas. And Ali, what are specifically we're going to be doing? We're going to be talking about brainstorming, analogous situations, creating a narrative.
I
But
think people are going to enjoy this one
yeah,
because, people love to jump on solutions. Like, this is your day.
yeah,
All
that's right.
done first.
That's right. All those solutions that we told you to have in your back pocket, you're going to need them today. This is their time to come out. But to really bring us into some strong creative confidence, who do we have with us today, Ali?
I am so excited to introduce Josina. She's joining us all the way from Norway. She
Mm-hmm.
is associate professor in the service design at Oslo School of Architecture. So she knows what she's talking about, and she's gonna really bring us let us bring out our inner Da Vinci. So Josina, without further ado, I'll hand it over to you to share your presentation, and let's get going.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Can you see it okay?
We sure can.
Perfect. And thanks, Ali and Aaron. And I'm told that you'll monitor the chat while this is going on. So please, anyone, if you have any questions about things that are going on, just kind of feed them through there. I would love to engage with you on some of the stuff that's bubbling up for you. So the kind of point of inspiration that I wanted to kind of leap off from today is just kind of acknowledging the time we're in. And so I thought kind of the theme for today will be about emergency and the idea of emergence within that, and really focusing on the notion of collective creativity amid Corona. Oh, right. So this is inspired by a quote by Rebecca Sonnet. If you don't know her work, she's a wonderful thinker based out of the US who I'm perpetually inspired by, particularly in this time, because she has a wonderful way of thinking about hope. But I just want to share this first quote. The word emergency comes from emerge, to rise out of, the opposite of merge, which comes from merger, to be within or under a liquid. Immersed, submerged. An emergency is a separation from the familiar, a sudden emergence into a new atmosphere, one that often demands that we ourselves rise to the occasion. To emerge into the unexpected is not always terrible, though these words have evolved to imply ill fortune. So for me, this is kind of a bit of a call to attention at the time of this kind of pandemic and what it affords in terms of kind of rising to the occasion. But at the same time, I want to highlight that this is a kind of messy middle ground. So being creative at a time like this is not so straightforward. This is not kind of the opportunity for everything. So I want to counter that quote with another quote of hers about this idea of a living soup. So when a caterpillar enters its chrysalids, it dissolves itself quite literally into liquid. In this state, what was a caterpillar and will be a butterfly is neither one nor the other. It's a sort of living soup. Within this living soup are the imaginal cells that will catalyze its transformation into winged maturity. It's a conflict, one that takes place while things that were frozen, solid, locked up, have become open and fluid, full of both the best and the worst possibilities. So it's just to call out for any of you who are feeling like you're actually in the soup right now, I just want to say that is so where we're at. That's so okay. We can be a liquid, we can be mush, and not kind of being like, this is our beautiful butterfly moment. So I just want to acknowledge that that's okay. So talking about creativity and ideation at a time like this can also be incredibly challenging when we're in the kind of messy middle. And kind of the last kind of point of inspiration and quote, some of you might know Naomi Klein, and she's written about crisis capitalism and what comes from these times. And I think this is why it's really important to me for us to talk about ideas and ideation today, because she says, in times of crisis, seemingly impossible ideas suddenly become possible. But whose ideas? Sensible, fair ones designed to keep as many people as possible safe, secure, and healthy, or predatory ideas designed to further enrich the already imaginably wealthy while leaving the most vulnerable further exposed. So this is a time where ideas are absolutely being taken up. Things are happening very rapidly that people have been pushing for a long period of time, but it can happen at every end of the spectrum. So depending on what ideas are lying around or what people are getting brought forward, helps to shape our kind of new normal that Erin was talking about. And so I think this is a critical time for us to kind of fight for those ideas that we believe in the kind of society and health system that we want to shape. So on that note, I would like to challenge people to kind of go back to the view options and the annotate function and just make a mark on this spectrum of where do you feel like you're at in terms of how creative you're feeling in this Corona time. Do you feel like you're kind of like more in that mushy middle living soup, just watching the world kind of change? Do you feel like you have some creative sparks, or are you in the like magical wizard moment of just being like, this is my time, things are happening, things are changing, I'm on it? Try and get a sense here. It seems like middle ground a little bit, but we have some magical wizards out there, and totally fair for those who are like sitting back in the telescope. But yeah, maybe my sense is that the side of the spectrum with creativity and things happening is where people are at, and maybe in part because you're part of this awesome kind of process of working through things as well, that things are really sparking for you. So that's super cool. Thank you very much. All right, so I also want to challenge some of the ideas about ideation that we have, and we've adopted these from, you know, popular culture, and Ali said even like our inner Da Vinci. And so let me push on that a little bit. And I think we absolutely need to move beyond kind of some of these ideals that we have about the creative genius, and that this work is not about kind of one person sitting in a room thinking outside the box with post-it notes and generating brilliant ideas. It's absolutely a kind of critical and reflective process of reusing and recycling and repurposing kind of collective intelligence. So the things that are swimming around, I'm a big believer in the idea that kind of no idea is a new idea, that everything is kind of shifting it for its context and making different things work, and borrowing a little bit and weaving threads together. And for me, that's really what the process of ideation is. It's juxtaposing things. It's living and breathing in a body and sensing things and then reacting to that. So for me, it's something that's really kind of experienced as within a collective. It's through your conversations that these things come on board. And it's not through kind of like this one kind of genius idea. But for me, there's a huge challenge kind of getting to some of these novel ideas, because so often we're totally stuck in the regular ways of working. There's this kind of pull and inertia that just keeps us in this loop of doing the same old things, of kind of thinking and doing in the same way. So even when we go to try and like ideate, we're just kind of like spewing out the things that we've always been taught and thinking, and the things that we've heard. So it's a huge challenge to move beyond the regular ways of working. But I'd say we're a bit lucky at this time that some of those things are being pushed up against when it comes to kind of unpacking that. So to really allow ourselves to think more kind of freely and divergently, we actually need to have an awareness of the ways in which things are constraining our thinking and action. So for me, getting to kind of novel and interesting ideas that push the needle and take some of those journeys that you've come up with and actually really kind of push them forward and enhance the experience, we need to let go of some of the constraints and become aware of, you know, how we're thinking about these things in traditional ways, and then kind of challenge and provoke on them. So we are often focusing, and when we do these kind of journeys that many of you did for homework and some of you may continue to do, we often focus on the really kind of tangible things that we can see. The, you know, what are the touch points along the way? So for someone with mental health issues, you know, if they're seeking out help, you know, what's the website look like? What does it mean to kind of call, and what kind of experience do they have? We look at the symbols and the activities that they do, the kind of conversations that they have with their family members or with their primary care doctor or their psychologist. And we often stay focused on these things that we can see. But I would argue that if we want to get to the kind of novel and interesting ideas when we're designing, we have to really like dig what's below the surface when it comes to these kinds of experiences. So we have all of these kind of taken for granted norms and rules and roles. And it's only by actually using the journey and that kind of analysis of what it is to appreciate these invisible aspects. So, you know, you could take that mental health journey that Erin talked about, and we could see, oh, there's an underlying norm here around stigma that is perpetuating these pain points that we see along the way. And that's something that like we take for granted, that it's like, it's so hard to talk about. Or actually we have this underlying assumption in the way that people seek out help, that they have to go to services to seek out help. That's the assumption, rather than the idea that maybe people are coming to them or reaching out. So when you start to kind of unpack, what are the rules of the game in these journeys? What's underneath that? That's when you can kind of flip those things on their head, and you can kind of get at more novel and interesting ideas to kind of challenge some of those things. So kind of stepping and grounding back in this time, there's a lovely piece by an Indian author, and it's a fantastic article online called "The Pandemic is the Portal" that talks about what's been happening in the Indian context during this time, which is hugely challenging. And he says, "The tragedy is immediate, real, epic, and unfolding before our eyes. But it isn't new. It's the wreckage of a train that has been careening down the track for years. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past, imagine their world anew. This one's no different. It's a portal, a gateway between one world and the next." And I would argue that this time is actually helping us to illuminate some of those taken for granted aspects that we are often so constrained by in our thinking and acting. So we've been confronted with many changes that has opened this up. And for me, this portal, the kind of portal of the pandemic, is this renewed awareness that we have about our systems. So again, I would ask you to kind of use the annotate function and try and use the text and add in here, tell me what taken for granted aspects of our system has Corona surfaced for you. So what are some of those underlying norms or rules or roles or ways of doing things that have kind of been put to, that you've been faced with or challenged with through these times? It could be something in your family context or something in your work context. The idea that patients must go to providers, totally, because in this COVID era, when there's all this risk of being exposed to lots of things, that's a huge one. I'm working on remote care, so I totally get that. that our jobs can't be done from home when they totally can. Yeah, we have norms that we need to go to the office, but we're revealing, oh, there's plenty of ways to do that. Technology and our beliefs about who should have the resources, yeah, that it's not distributed. Childcare, just in who does that and how our society sets that up. Yeah, the working office, assumptions that interactions with healthcare should be in person. Totally. Yeah, it's just that's the standard. That's across the board. Yeah, how working with people and seeing people contributes to good mental health. So maybe even the taken for grantedness of mental health in general, and the relational quality of mental health, that has definitely bubbled to the surface. I think I'm reading in red that you can't get work done when you have kids at home. No, we don't always think about that, but that's come to totally the forefront for some people. Oh, brilliant one at the top corner here, that family caregivers are essential partners in healthcare and they're not visitors. Totally. So when we have rule changes or policy changes, we actually come to actually witness the importance of certain things that have just been generally a part of the system that maybe we actually even haven't been doing a good job of either, of really prioritizing the role of family caregivers. But now we can see the dramatic impact of when they're actually separated from the whole care experience, or how to connect in. And I would argue that these sorts of reflections that you're putting up here right now are actually the perfect starting ground for novel and interesting ideas. That when we can actually get at these pieces, this is what can unlock your kind of constraint around thinking and really kind of push that forward. And I totally also, I'm seeing now that there's some contrast between different people. So someone who's saying like kids at home hasn't been an issue for us. And I would just argue that this conflict between what works for some and what works for others is also a super interesting place for novelty. So when you see, you know, certain people, these kind of rules or norms make sense for, and certain people, it's like, oh, brilliant that this is happening and it affords a new opportunity. But those conflicts can illuminate where it doesn't work for some, can show an opportunity for difference. So super cool. Thank you very much. These are really interesting. Now I'm just going to get into sharing with you an example of a project that's kind of hot off the press that I have just been doing with my service design students for the last 10 weeks. And I'm going to show you my impression of the process of coming up with kind of novel ideas. And this might be a little different than the standard kind of design thinking process that tends, and the kind of cycle that you showed, Erin, that tends to kind of portray ideation and thinking about ideas and then testing down the road. I am a big believer in kind of making to think. So even and to use the kind of world around me as a way to kind of bring forward some of these ideas. So I'm going to tell you about a project where we tried to do just that, and, you know, generate ideas by probing and pushing and exploring these kind of taken for granted aspects. And we worked with two services in a local municipality here. So here in Norway, municipalities are responsible for primary care, for general health services, and then the regions are responsible for hospitals and things like that. So we worked with a service called Helsehjelpen, which means health help in English. And it's a pilot project, and essentially it's kind of a call-in service to help you navigate within the system and help support a proactive approach. And within that, they provide a service around remote care. It's part of a national pilot project where they do home monitoring of health for patients with particular conditions like diabetes or heart disease, or other patients that could benefit from having someone kind of call and check up on their condition, and maybe not having so much needing to go in to see the doctor. So just to kind of frame for you, when we start this project, we're also really grounding ourselves in certain frameworks. So as many of you are thinking about, you know, what are the problems? How do you construct it? I often, in addition to kind of looking at a context, pretty deliberately choose some sorts of frames that I'm using to guide my exploratory process. So in this project, we use two kinds of frames, one about social structures and one about three horizons, and I'll just tell you those super briefly. So social structures is this kind of iceberg idea that we have the kind of more visible things on the top are symbols, artifacts, activities. And then below that, we have different kinds of social structures, the more regulatory ones, rules and laws. Then we have more normative ones, the norms and roles. And then we have the more kind of beliefs and frames. And you could think about this as, in this webinar right now, we're upholding certain social structures. There's a norm that, one person presents and everyone listens. And with that are some symbols and artifacts. We have the mic being muted is a symbol and artifact that shows some of these norms play out. So this is kind of what we use to help unpack some of these service experiences. And I'm not sure, I know you had Zaina Kayat present to you the first round of this course, and she's a lover also of the Three Horizons framework, but we use this to explore how the service system of health is transitioning. So from the Horizon 1, which is the legacy system that's slowly falling out of fit over time. Then we have the kind of merger in the orange of Horizon 3, which is the kind of ideal or desired future that we're working towards. In this case, it was a more distributed, connected care. But then we have this murky middle ground of the transition and some of the conflict that exists between those two systems, the bricks and mortar system, and then this distributed virtual connected system. So we use this as a lens to explore where are the different services at? Where are there kind of conflicts between what we're working towards and these legacy systems? And if you don't know this framework, I think it's definitely worth checking out. Okay, just to kind of put this in context, we started our research in person. Over 2 days, we conducted 44 interviews with different healthcare staffs, patients, family caregivers, from the hospital to the GPs to the nurses and occupational therapists working in remote care, and did a series of workshops with them. They were digital because then we had the kind of COVID response, and we did these kind of tiny tests that I'll tell you about. So this is just to say that, for me, coming up with ideas is really grounded in this kind of careful analysis and deeply embedded in context. And I think many of you are living and breathing this context. So that's the cool part about how you can kind of come up with ideas. And since we're in this kind of COVID era, I also just want to say, show this is our way of working. We're on Zoom trying to do these workshops, sometimes like moving about, and working with different healthcare partners, sometimes a bunch of people in the room. But just to give you a sense. And Ali mentioned Miro, which is something we've been using quite a lot in our kind of working team so that we can all collectively be kind of putting things together. We can have a question and it's like a beehive where everybody's adding these kind of virtual post-it notes in response to things, and we can really dialogue and discuss together. And we found that actually this virtual space has afforded some awesome reflection time, that we can record our sessions and then listen to some of our recorded sessions and push back around what's stopping our thinking. So just, I don't think there's huge constraints in virtual workshops and things like that, but there's also certain affordances. So to kind of move into these directions and push our ideas further and support staff in pushing their ideas further, we kind of synthesized our interviews, and we did journey mapping as well as you were doing, into kind of 3 key issues. So one of the issues was clarifying and communicating the identity. Who is this kind of Healthy Help in remote care service? It was very hard for them to describe themselves, and then people didn't really know about them. There was also very unclear kind of service scope. What were the boundaries? What would they provide? What would they not provide? And really strong issues with collaboration. So whenever a patient was moving from the hospital to their service, what were those referrals like, or in between providers? It was very tricky. So kind of in terms of the communication and identity, we kind of gathered up information and insight around what was going on. So as I said, they were finding it struggle to kind of communicate who they were. And in relation to this, like when we're thinking about ideating or coming up with alternatives, one of the techniques that I often use and that my students used in this that was very helpful is the notions of using metaphors. So when you have a certain way of doing things, if you think, what are the different metaphors for thinking about this? So when it came to Halsey Yelpin's identity, they talked about the metaphor of the social safety net. So what if Halsey Yelpin was really thought of to be a safety net? How would they kind of design that patient journey in a different way, or a part of that? Or what if they were considered a tour guide through the system? How would that shift their kind of experience through how they guided people through? Or what if they were considered to be a friend that's just kind of someone who wants what's best for you, who talks to you? And then the fourth one, which you can't see, is more of a helicopter. What if they were more about having a system view of things and helping see what was needed in different places? And we had an online workshop to kind of unpack some of these different metaphors and see what one makes sense. And it's not always about, what most people agree with. So in this, you can see, okay, most of the staff thought they should be tour guides. But actually, it's really interesting to unpack the one green checkbox that said, maybe we should be helicopters. And actually kind of illuminate, why do people think differently? What is driving somebody else's idea? And that can really open up some kind of novel and interesting things. But then what we did was, we normally talk about in design kind of testing things out after we've developed a full concept. But what we did was kind of probe into the system to learn about it and to help support the ideation process. So related to communication, one of the students was just like, let's build out almost, I don't know if any of you have played Mad Libs or any of your children have played Mad Libs, where it's kind of like this fill in the blank with, you have a verb and you have to just add in a verb. But they did this sort of fill in the blank style building out of an email message that would go out to citizens. And just by doing this, that started to spark and illuminate different ideas about who they should be and their identity. So this kind of process just kind of brings things forward. Another way, they just actually super quickly in a couple of days developed different website ideas. These websites don't work. That's not the point, but just to start reacting to different extremes. So they on one side have something that's very kind of clear, offering very scoped, another one that's very free, one that are more about patients self-determining and supporting themselves, the help us help you, versus them doing more. And just by kind of thinking about the spectrum and building out alternatives, it can help explore and define where your ideation might go. Another kind of key insight around this service scope. So here in Norway, people are often called potatoes if you're very versatile. So if you can do lots of different things. And that's because in Norway, people eat potatoes in lots of ways and lots of meals, as I had mentioned to a few of you before we got started here. So one of the insights in this project is that this service team were a bunch of yes potatoes. Whenever they were confronted with something, they just said yes. They said yes to everything. Somebody called, they would do it. They didn't have any clear boundaries and in their way of working or what they would do. And so it just took over their day. So in relation to this, we've just talked about, okay, what are the extremes? Should this service be a kind of potato-like role that's highly flexible, or should they be highly defined with, these are the offerings, we can only do what's in and out of this? And then having discussions about that can prompt these kinds of ideas. And then also to just okay, what's in and outside of scope? The one team just decided to kind of call up the service with a more wild idea that would be considered way out of scope for them. That's okay, I'm this person. It's totally preventative. They don't have any really healthcare issues, but they say they kind of want to move in this preventative direction, but they want to get more connected with social services. So then they just call up and they test, okay, what is the kind of response? They tell the person beforehand or the team beforehand that they're going to call in sometime in the afternoon. And then they just see what comes from this call. Oh, actually, they're pretty decent at doing some preventative work, but they didn't really have a strong insight into what services to directly connect them with. So some of it was, so if they're going to play that role, they also maybe need to have more kind of prepared in order to do that, or they need to kind of scope in. So you can learn quite quickly, and then you can generate ideas. Oh, and in this, actually, they had an idea of sending out a postcard to people to kind of call in with these preventative things. So you can just really quickly, even before you're generating all ideas, just test something out to kind of poke the system and see how it responds. In this one, in the remote care services, they actually wanted to explore getting more into the larger lifestyle things. So many of these patients, of course, are being monitored for particular health conditions, but what would it be like to talk about their cooking, to talk about their exercise, to talk about their social connections? And so they just sent out a digital kind of postcard to one patient in the course of 15 minutes, and the nurse had a call with that patient about exercise, and just started to see, okay, do you feel like this was in or outside of scope? Was this a fruitful conversation? How did that work? And should, if there's, that could emerge to be a new idea to more support kind of wellness services, or maybe, you know, that's not really in the kind of wheelhouse for these particular people. And this just shows like how it's done. You know, Miro was used to help design these like digital postcards and things like that. The last theme around the kind of collaboration is some really felt that actually this service, who was meant to help navigate, sometimes ended up just being one more kind of silo or island within the larger system. And there was these difficult, you know, recruiting. This family doctor says recruiting patients is slow because I have a lot else to do. I should be recruiting more. So just to push on this, I mean, sometimes these underlying assumptions, we don't have to test out the solution. We can just probe into them as a way to understand more. So one patient, or one designer and a student actually just set up this tiny test with the service team to say, okay, you have an assumption of kind of collaboration and working together all the time. We're going to create an experiment where for one morning, remote care and Healthy Yelpin are two separate services. You cannot talk, you cannot exchange information. Anytime you do, or you think about something, you have to write it down, just as a way to understand how you're already collaborating. And they kind of did these little mini diaries. And it's by illuminating their regular workday, things happen. Like they figured out, actually, these service providers, they have been meaning to take lunch for 3 years, and they've only done it once together, that they've actually had any time to collaborate. They also realized how much they're interrupting each other and the inefficiency in doing that. So you just start to unpack all of these potential ideas for things that could change when you push or probe into the system or just track something. Another example in this kind of squarely in this COVID time is with their remote care. One student just explored what would it be like to expand this to cancer patients, and they got in the cancer nurse and the remote care nurse and explored, can we map this out really quickly together, and what would it take? And actually this kind of test sparked them doing it, and they realized many of the patients, because here also family caregivers can't be in the hospital, that it makes more sense, especially for palliative oncology patients, that they should do this more remote monitoring at home and check in that way. And even just, it was not meant to be like an idea that would move forward, but just actually understand collaboration. But just by sparking like, okay, have this meeting, set it up, imagine we're doing it, it just started unraveling and happening, and it made sense for everyone. So this is just a kind of wheel of these kind of tiny tests that the students went through and kind of developed. So they started by asking, what's bubbling to the surface that could be interesting? Let's bring out the magnifying glass, really zoom in on what that is. Then they created hypotheses or unpacked their assumptions. They chose a method, and I'll share some of those methods with you. They thought about what's like a very, very, very small way that they could do it. So many of these were a half an hour, and they took a day to prepare, or a couple 2 hours to prepare. Then it was like thinking about how you would do it, mixing it all together, and just seeing the reaction. So for me, this ideation comes a lot from just probing into the system and doing things. These were some of the kind of methods that they explored to help support their ideation. So testing something, it doesn't have to be even a solution, but testing something for a short time, really pushing to provoke a reaction, keeping track of something. The idea of like finding out what's in your fridge is just this idea of like, what resources do you have that are underutilized that you could be put to use? Can you do a diary, or can someone do a diary? Could that help spark something? Can you stir the surface and just like make a change and see how that happens? Can you role play something really quickly, and then new ideas come from that? Can you just focus on observing behaviors? Can you switch your hats with somebody? Can you show the fish to water or show somebody something that's normally taken for granted? Try an unlikely collaboration, or kind of just test the barriers of things. So these sort of forced associations sometimes can help prompt ideas in a good way. And we did most of this online, and then the experiments, you know, the students were at a distance, and then the healthcare personnel are kind of doing some of these experiments. And together then it sparks all of this ideation that can perpetuate their ongoing kind of design and innovation process. So just in closing, kind of reminders from this is really, when we're doing, like, thinking about novel ideas, be playful, totally toy with your ideas, do counter ideas, think about the most ridiculous, horrible ideas. Don't coddle your ideas, just kind of be loose with them and play with them. Another thing, if you're working in a group or with others, is really to remember, or even with yourself sometimes, diverge first and then converge. So don't try and do that at the same time. If you're thinking wide about all the possible ideas, don't critique yourself or your ideas at the same time. Separate the time that you're thinking really wide and big, and go for quantity, and then do the work around what are the most interesting ones. The other big thing, and I can't stress this enough, and how I work as a designer, is very much, tapping into your own curiosity and your own instincts. If you think something's interesting, if something's really pulling you, there's something there, even if you can't fully rationally articulate it. Following those curiosities in idea development makes sense. I talked today about unearthing your assumptions and testing them. For me, that's a big way to unlock potential ideas. And I would argue, when you're going through this process and you come up with all these possibilities, don't just like select an idea, be like, okay, this one of 30. I would really think about, how do you synthesize the best of many ideas, or see what's wrong with some ideas and use that to counterbalance and really weave them into one that's more cohesive or systemic, or really powerful because it's kind of leveraging multiple insights. And then the last is just, I would encourage you to kind of make to think. Don't just like think first and then try and make it. I would really, try it in your everyday life, do something to kind of test and spark that. So that's kind of just from me. And I would say, like, my view again of ideation and coming up with this is like, be alive in the world and tapping into your everyday spheres as a way to get inspiration, and try and push on things to see how they react as a way to prompt further thinking. So now I'd love to open things up and see if you have any questions or challenges, or any discussion points. Perhaps there's something in the chat too.
That was amazing, Josina. It was,
I feel so inspired. Yeah.
I was initially like, is this too academic? I'm like, no, this is amazing. This is exactly what we want to hear.
That was absolutely awesome. So
a little bit of academicness in there, and challenging some of the norms of design thinking, but it sounds like you can handle it. So
it was really good. And my favorite thing is the tiny tests. Like, I love that.
Yes.
I'm going to use that now. Instead of saying prototyping, like tiny test. Just throw a little tiny test on it.
It's a smaller threshold, right? Prototyping, when you get to the solution point already of like it can be too like unruly, but if you just want to do something for like a half an hour or push, it's just so much easier. You can get people on board to explore something so much easier.
One question I had was around like in healthcare, there's this whole thing about people bringing in best practice as an idea. And what is your kind of experience with it? How do you navigate that? Because people feel like, well, this is best practice, it's been researched, but I feel like it quickly converges everyone. So what has been kind of your experience? How do you navigate around that?
Yeah, I think for me, that's all good input. I think a designer in healthcare has to attend to evidence, has to attend to best practice, has to see the scope. But I would argue, sadly, a lot of our best practices, a lot of our kind of evidence-based practices in healthcare are actually we have way more evidence for, medical outcomes than we do for service experience or how the system works. So
that's a really good
it is a challenging domain in that regard. And I would also say that much of our evidence is geared to particular populations, and some folks fall out of that. And so we need to be thinking about how services work for them. And often where we're designing are the spaces that we don't know, what the existing solution is. So I'd say, design isn't best at everything. Design, if we have, you know, we have so many randomized control trials of how to best provide chemotherapy. As a designer, I'm not going to go in and say, oh, we should restructure when chemo is given based on this insight. No way. I'm going to absolutely take that evidence and best practice. But is there really good best practice and evidence around how to cultivate that when, you know, how to support that person's feelings and process and support someone at home going through that? There's not as much going on with that. So for me, I would say, yeah, bring on the best practice, let that inspire. Bring on the outrageous practice, bring on the worst practice, bring on the analogous spaces from finance, from horseback riding, who cares? Let it inspire and actually just like build on that, build on the best of the best practices. But I agree, like not getting stuck on, oh, somebody's done it perfectly before. There's a really lack of perfect, and it hasn't scaled. Why hasn't it scaled? Why
We have
did that
another
perfect solution
question,
die?
Josina. Anita's asking, how do you redirect a group to help them with brainstorming and creativity?
Mm-hmm.
Any certain questions you ask, any probes you do in terms of there's a conversation happening? Because we sometimes get those, also the hippos in the room with the, you know, the highest person paid opinion, and the one person with the loudest says an idea and everyone just starts kind of saying, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And how do you get away from that quick convergence?
Yeah. So, I mean, for the loudest part, I am a big believer in giving people personal time to reflect and think about on their own about ideas to, and of kind of giving people that time and space to go around. I'm also, if I'm working in a large group facilitation, I'm totally not against really strategically putting all the loud people together or taking the people with power and actually bringing them out of the room and giving them a specific task and then people doing the real work. I'm totally not opposed to that.
Distract them.
But in terms of like getting people on to like shifting gears, I would say I genuinely think that we need inspiration for brainstorming. We need to provoke to get to brainstorming. So to just say, okay, now we're coming up with ideas, for me, that doesn't, there's not the kind of juiciness. I'm often like showing something to push against, whether it's bad ideas, whether it's a future scenario, whether it's getting them to experience something. And then I feel like you need an experience, you need to feel something and then generate. So I think,
Thank you.
yeah.
This is, we would love to just keep listening to you, Josina. We are a bit of short on time, but folks, follow Josina on Twitter at Josina Vink. Hopefully you can have some of the more conversations with her. She has tons of knowledge. Again, thank you, Josina. Stay on the line with us as we finish our call. Folks, we're just going to finish up now. Erin, I'll let you take over. And
Sure. Well, okay, I am inspired and I'm so glad that you dipped into all of those things because guess what, guys? It's time for homework again. And you are going to get a chance to apply everything that Josina has been talking about to your own problem. So let's get started. There are 3 pages of homework today, and what we're doing is we're taking from the journey map now. So this is where we were at before. I don't know if you remember seeing the journey map that I created for my problem, which was I had really frustrating time dropping my grandma off at the hospital and then parking. And I created this journey map last week, and what I did is I took a look at the lowest point to help me understand where was the most opportunity for impact. So that's why I kind of ended up focusing on this one. How might we take better care of the elderly while their caregivers are parking? But I also kind of took a look at where I had the greatest emotion, the highest or most positive emotion, and that was really around how might we create comfortable drop-offs. So when I looked at the lowest point that I was at and then the highest point that I was at, that's what I used to move forward in this idea. Now, Josina was talking about, you can't just, suddenly say, okay, let's start brainstorming. Let's go. Just put all your ideas out. What you really need is all of these different things percolating up above. And we've been talking about how things are kind of up there. You're thinking about, what questions you're asking and the possibilities that are there and the opinions of people that know about these things and the stories and the emotions that are shared. And all of those things are bubbling around. And that's where you put them in and get the inspiration. And the inspiration triggers, hopefully, all the ideas, even the silly ones. You want to get all those crazy, bizarre and good and bad and really no judgment ideas out there. And then you start to filter them. So you think about, okay, so what are some of the assumptions that we can make? So what are the opportunities? You think about what reality, you know, what can we feasibly do? And finally, you get down to that one point that you want to try out, the one thing you want to see. Hey, maybe will it work? I don't know. Let's find out. So you can get to that, and it's represented by a star, but you don't know for sure if it's the greatest idea you ever had, but it is the one that has filtered down to seem the one that you want to test out first. And so to do that, to get to the idea of inspiration, we use, like Josina mentioned, metaphors or analogous situations. So we want to use an analog is when you take a look at one situation and then you consider a parallel situation that might seem very, very different, but how can we find the similarities between? So for example, I'm going to walk you through this. This kind of method can really get you unstuck, can start to inspire ideas, can really get you out of that box that you've been thinking in and thinking about different ways that you can approach a problem. So for example, let's consider a hospital trauma room or an operating room. Taking a look at how we can improve the service that is in this hospital trauma room, we first start thinking about, well, what other situation is very busy, has great urgency, has a team that has to come in and use a lot of intuitive thinking in order to solve problems, and where the stakes are really high. And really a comparable solution to that would be like a pit crew coming in during the Indy 500 to fix a car in the middle. So what we do is we think about, okay, so let's take a look at this pit crew. What do they do so that they can do their job at the highest level? What do they do to improve the experience and to make things better for the person that they're trying to work on? And well, they have prepackaged fix kits. They have cordless tools. They have specific roles and responsibilities, and they use their intuitive assessment in order to help fix things. They track their time, and they have special uniforms to designate who's doing what. So you take a look at these things that the pit crew is doing, and you apply it to what can you bring into the hospital in order to improve the experience of the people working in the trauma room as well. Now in Austin, Texas, they actually did this. This is an actual example of how they improved their trauma room. And they found that by using pre-packaged fix kits with cordless tools, they could assess and practice their medicine faster. They could get people through it quicker, and they had higher, less mortality rates through the trauma room. So this is what the analogy is supposed to do. It's supposed to trigger some ideas for you. It's not meant to be a test or a perfect parallel. So when I think back to my grandmother's situation, and I'm creating an analogy for her and thinking about, okay, where can I'm thinking, okay, so my grandmother, or dropping my grandma at the hospital entrance, is like leaving my favorite jacket at the restaurant coat check. All right, so what do fancy restaurants do to ensure that that service is something that benefits their clients? Well, you're greeted personally, there's a ticket exchange, so you're comfortable with the value, leaving your valuable behind, and you know that there's safe and secure storage for while you're away. Similarly, finding hospital parking is kind of like finding Waldo sometimes. So what are successful measures used by Where's Waldo experts? I actually looked this up. There are Where's Waldo experts. And what they say to do is to look for the familiar pattern, focus on landmarks, and eliminate the obvious. So with these ideas kind of percolating, these are supposed to trigger ideas. You may not be able to take exactly that idea across over to the problem that you're trying to solve. It's not always going to be a perfect parallel, but there might be nuggets in there that can really stimulate what you're going to do. So this is the first page of your homework to do, and I really recommend doing this right before you're about to do the next page, because the ideas that are stimulated when you're doing the analogies will benefit as you move on to the next page in the Crazy Eights. So then we get to the guts of ideation for our process, which is Crazy Eights, and we have a few ground rules that we like to use. So don't judge, go for quality, get as many ideas as you can go out there. Don't try to figure out whether they're good ideas or bad ideas. Stay focused on the topic. I mean, you might go off on tangents, but try to bring around again. And if you're working in a group of people and ideating together, build on the ideas of other people. So we use the phrase yes and to contribute, never no but. If you're ideating by yourself, you know, it's better to ideate by yourself and not be influenced by the ideas of other people, and then to go back to the group and say, oh, these are the ideas I came up with. Because what something happens is groupthink. So somebody would say, oh, this is one idea, and then you go off in this tangent and you kind of don't get to explore all the other ideas that might be percolating in other people's brains. So ideate by yourself first and then bring your ideas back to the group. So here we are, Crazy Eights. Now this is one of our favorite activities, and it is just like you said, like it sounds. You are going to come up with 8 different ways to solve this problem in each of the frames, and we encourage you to draw. Use stick men, use boxes. Nobody else has to know what these ideas mean to you because it's just for you. They're about creating triggers. And by only having 1 minute per frame, you create this urgency to get things down, and you remove the necessity of making it look good. So I actually did this exercise, snapshot it. So some of those things, I have to confess to you guys, I am an artistic person. I am not good at drawing stickmen, and it doesn't matter because nobody else is supposed to see this but me. These are supposed to be triggering ideas from me. So you create this, put it on there, and then when you get through that, you think about which of these ideas can be combined to come up with the best idea, or what is it trigger in you? I mean, some of them are kind of crappy ideas. Some of them might be stellar. Like Josina mentioned before, don't just pick one, but think about how you can create something from the best of all of it. This next slide is actually an example of a doctor's Crazy Eights, and he professed at the beginning, I can't draw, I can't do this. And guess what? He can. So if you think that you can't draw and that means that you can't do Crazy Eights, it's not true. You don't have to be able to draw in order to do this generative exercise. So once you've generated at least 8 ideas on how to solve your problem, you're going to choose the ones that really make the most sense for you. And with the storyboard, it's really the narrative of your story. And I know I'm rushing through this really fast, guys. So if you have any questions or if something doesn't make sense, just email us at design.lab. And we'll answer any questions you have. But I like to start in the middle. Even when I try not to start at the middle, I end up starting at the middle. So the middle is kind of like the big idea. What is going to happen? So my idea for this is almost like a valet service for seniors parking. And how does the human find out about your idea? So there's a quick little image there. And how does it improve your human's experience? Now with the storyboard, this is kind of like your sales pitch. So there is an opportunity to create a story. So the story that I created about my idea is, as soon as we arrive, we can see the sign that shows us where the elderly drop-off is. And Grandma can't believe that there's a special space just for her to wait. Then a valet is there to help Grandma out of the car and into the special Oasis shelter. I sign Grandma in by tapping my smartphone. This also directs me to reserved parking for senior caregivers, which is close by. And then Grandma is comfortable, she's safe from the elements, and has someone nearby if she needs anything. And when I sign into the parking lot, the attendant gets a signal and tells my Grandma how long I'll take to return. So you can see in the story, I talk about how the experience is delightful for the user. What made a difference for us from what really happened in our experience at the beginning and now this kind of idealistic experiencing my idea of Oasis parking for elderly caregivers. So once you've got your narrative and your storyboard, you're really at a point to do one of those tiny tests that Josina was talking about, and take your storyboard and show it to somebody. Ask them what they think about your idea. Ask them for feedback on whether there could be an improvement if you're missing somebody. Like we've mentioned before, we like to use the rule of 5. So getting 5 people to feedback on your idea is great. If you, in this time of COVID, can't find 5 people to show your idea to, that's okay. You can actually just take a picture, throw it online, and get the world to vote on it. No, I'm just kidding. Just get some feedback from your idea, because remember, next week we are going to be back and ready to build our prototypes. And this means having something to show people about your idea, and get bigger feedback, more direct feedback about what the more developed idea that you're going to do. So in addition to Josina's takeaways, just remember, everything is a remix. And that's what she was talking about, in the fact that creativity is never, when you come up with these ideas, it's very rare to have a completely unique idea that's created in a void. Generally, it's influenced by everything that's around you, everything you've been thinking about, all of the understanding that you have about the problem and the people in the center of the problem, and everything that's done before. Everything is a remix when it comes to creativity. And creativity is not artistry. You don't have to be an artist in order to use your creative muscles. And finally, ideation isn't perfect. There is no such thing as the perfect idea or the perfect solution. And it's really important to let go of that idea of creating something perfect before you can move on to the next stage. So, Ali, who are we going to hear from next week?
Next week, folks, we have another powerhouse from Toronto. His name is Tai Hu. He's actually one of the directors at the University of Health Network Open Lab, and he also was the co-founder for Choosing Wisely.
Yes.
He'll be talking to us about prototyping and actually how to really show and tell your little ugly baby, and get feedback.
That's right. And as always, if you guys can't get enough of us, we do have a short and sweet little Friday shift tomorrow, talking about pandemic resiliency and really about how to maintain some kind of feasible balance between your mind, body, and spirit during a crisis. And finally, we just really want to encourage you guys to reach out. I know, Josina, I wanted to thank you again. I know you're somebody that we're absolutely going to ask to come back and do this again with us. Thank you so much for all of the thought and passion that you put into your presentation. Everybody else, follow us on Twitter, have a conversation with us, send us your stuff. We're happy to answer questions. Hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Stay safe.